Welcome back to the daily Rambam class. We are up to chapter 3 of the laws of Shechita, and we will be speaking about 5 things that disqualify the Shechita process. Let's take a look. But before we do that, it is Thursday, so we will begin with a brief overview of where we are in the Rambam.
We've lost your voice, Rabbi. Everything's frozen.
Looks like we've lost Rabbi. Remind the voice. We've been having problems like this today with the internet and the different chats. I don't know if it's the crazy wind, but then again, different parts, different areas. So
Yeah. I can.
Rabbi's disappeared.
He's probably dialing in again.
He said he would have to go and attend to his little girl.
I am sorry about that interruption, but I am back.
Good.
It's Thursday. Let's start with as we usually do, a general overview of where we're up to in the Rambam. We are up to book number 5 of the 14 volumes of the Rambam, which means that we are more than a third of the way through the 14 volumes of the Rambam. And in the 5th book, which speaks about holiness, we speak about forbidden relations, we speak about forbidden foods, and finally we speak about the Shechita process, which obviously relates to foods. In these 14 chapters that deal with Shechita, we are up to chapter number 3, so it's 2 weeks, and these are the general topics that are discussed. We started by discussing which animals, where on the neck, and the qualifications of the knife. Yesterday we spoke about shefting for ulterior reasons. Today we speak about 5 disqualifiers. Tomorrow we'll speak about the sheichet. And then for about a week, we'll speak about sick animals, which is quite a significant topic which people forget about when it comes to the price of kosher chicken or meat more particularly. In addition to there having to be a sheichet that checks it, every single animal is inspected in a very comprehensive way, which I don't believe happens to any other meat. And we'll learn, you'll get some real classes on the anatomy of an animal. And then we'll speak about the mitzvah of not killing a mother and child in one day, not taking away the mother bird, and finally the mitzvah to cover the blood. So that's what we'll be covering over the next approximately 2 weeks. But for today, let's take a look at chapter 3. Hey, oh no, it looks like... Here we go. So today's Rambam speaks about 5 things that disqualify the Shechita. The first is shehiyah, pausing. The second is drasa, which is pressing. The third is chalada, which is digging. The fourth is sorry, we're having some issues. The fourth is hagrama, which is slipping, and the fifth is ikur, which is uprooting. So over the next 30 or so halachas, we will be going through each of these 5 disqualifications and describing exactly what they are. So that was halacha 1. Let's move on to halacha number 2. And over the next few halachas, we will discuss pausing. So what is meant by shehiyah? A person began to shecht, but then while he was in the middle of shechting, he lifted up his knife. Maybe he suddenly thought his wife's not kosher. I see someone's having an issue entering the class, but I don't think there's much I could do about that. Anyhow, shehiyah is a person began to shecht, and while he was in the middle of shechting, he paused. He lifted up his hand. Maybe he thought something was wrong with his knife, or maybe his phone rang, and then he continued. But for a moment, he lifted the knife. He paused in between. Whether he did so unintentionally, intentionally, or because of forces beyond his control, if he or another person completed the slaughter on the spot, so if there were 2 sheikhtim together, at the moment the one guy, I don't know, maybe he was also a member of Hatzalah, and so suddenly he gets a call, and there's another sheikh standing right next to him. The moment he stopped, he handed over the knife and allowed the other sheikh to complete the process, which, by the way, for a cow, it's not a 1 second process. For a chicken, it's a half a second, a split second, very fast. But for a cow, it takes a bit of time to shecht the animal. So suddenly his phone rang, or there was an emergency, and he gave it over to somebody else, and the other person completed it. So if there was no pause in between, or the pause was short enough, then it is still kosher. But if he waited the amount of time it would take to lift up the animal, cause it to lie down, and then shecht it, then that is considered a pause which disqualifies the shechita. Number 3. Now, what about a small domesticated animal, like I guess a sheep or a goat, which when you come close to them, I mean, a sheep or a goat is literally a fraction of the size of a cow. So the measure of shehiyah is the amount of time it would take to lift up that animal, cause it to lie down and slaughter it. So according to the nature of the type of animal, that's how long the pause would need to be in order for the shechita to become disqualified. A large domestic animal, the measure of shehiyah is the amount of time it would take to lift it up the animal, cause it to lie down and slaughter it. With regards to a chicken, which you don't lie down, the measure of shehiyah is the amount of time it would take to lift up a small animal, cause it to lie down and slaughter it. So with regards to chickens, we follow the same measurement as sheep or goats. Okay, so that's the basics. That's how long. Now, if a person cut the sides, he started cutting, and then he waited a little bit, let's say 2 seconds, and then he continued cutting, and then waited a little bit and continued cutting again. He did this multiple times, and each time he waited, it was for a short amount of time that it does not qualify the shechita. But if you add together all of the waiting periods together, it's more than the amount of pausing. It's more than the amount of time that disqualifies the shechita. So here we have a suffix. We're unsure whether this does or does not disqualify the shechita, and so it would not be able to be eaten. The animal is considered an avela, not kosher. Similarly, if you waited the amount of time it takes to lift up the animal, cause it to lie down, and cut only a section of the sides, but not entirely, again, there's a doubt whether it is considered an avela. So that's all how long. Now, in halacha 5, we learned that done is done, meaning that if he shechted the majority of one of the pipes, there's 2 pipes, there's the wood pipe and there's the gullet. So if he cut majority of one of these 2 sides for a chicken, or the majority of both sides for an animal, then the shechita is done, because as you learned on Tuesday, once the majority of one of the pipes is cut for a bird, or the majority of 2 of the pipes is cut for an animal, then the animal is considered shechted. It's kosher. So even if he decided that he wanted to be extra religious and he wanted to go back and cut not just the majority of the pipe, but he wanted to cut it completely or to cut more of it, so then that wouldn't be considered like he waited in the middle of the shechita and disqualified, because once he did what he did, the animal's already kosher. And once it's kosher, whatever he does thereafter is irrelevant. It's like his shechting meat that was already shechted. Now, this might sound very obvious to you, but I'll tell you a very interesting halacha, which either you've already learned or you'll be learning at some point in the Rambam. And that is, one of the 7 Noahide laws is that one is not allowed to take a limb of a living animal. Listen to this, it's fascinating. If the sheikh shechted the animal, but while the animal's nerve system was still causing the animal to move around, a non-Jew went and cut off a piece of that animal, then the non-Jew would be violating this mitzvah of eating of a living animal. Even though the animal was already shechted, it's still, for a non-Jew, it's still considered alive until the body stops moving. So even after shechita, for a non-Jew, the animal is still considered alive, because a non-Jew doesn't use the process of shechita to kill. For a Jew, on the other hand, since for a Jew, shechita is what makes the animal kosher, if the animal was shechted and then a Jew removed a limb from the animal while the nerve system was still causing it to move, then it would be considered like taking a limb from a dead animal, which would not be a problem at all. Interesting phenomena. So that's why perhaps you would have thought that even though the sheikh had shechted majority of the pipes and it's kosher, maybe if you paused and then cut more, it's considered like the shechita continues. We say no, that is done. Let's take a look at the next halacha. And finally, the air pipe versus the gullet. So when it comes to the air pipe, we say that if the air pipe has a cut in it, then the animal is not considered fatally ill. Okay, if it has a small cut, it's not considered fatally ill. On the other hand, if the gullet has even a little tiny hole in it, then the animal is considered fatally ill. And that will affect the halachas, the next 3 halachas. So if one cuts half or less than half of the windpipe, and then he waits, and then he continues shechting it, it's not considered like he waited in the middle of the shechita. Why not? Because whatever he did beforehand is considered like nothing happened yet, since when he cuts a minority of the air pipe, the animal is still considered kosher. So we ignore that first cutting and we say the shechita only starts once he cuts the majority, and so there was no cause that disqualified it. But if he cut the majority of the windpipe, or even perforated the gullet in the slightest amount, since this does cause an animal to become fatally ill, it does cause the animal to become a treifa. So if he just cut the gullet a little bit, even a little dot, and then paused for however long a pause disqualifies, and then continued, then the animal would be not kosher. It's worth mentioning that the sheikh is regarded as, or is usually wanted to be, the most pious individual in the entire community. Why? Because there are certain things that nobody in the world will ever know except for the sheikh himself. This is an example. If the sheikh had started shechting, and then he waited a few moments, about the time that disqualifies, and then he continued, nobody will ever know. Everybody will see this animal was shechted, but what they don't know is that the animal actually is not kosher. So this is just one of many examples of which a sheikh needs to be trusted in a way that nobody will ever know. And the only thing that's stopping him from doing the wrong thing is his fear of heaven. And so that's why we want an extremely God-fearing individual to be the sheikh. The sheikh needs to be not just talented in his hands, but he needs to be very God-fearing, so that he will ensure that if anything does go wrong, he disqualifies the animal, even though it's to his detriment. Because if he's being paid for his time, so which is how it generally works, then if one more animal is kosher, it means that the butcher that's hiring him, or the community that's hiring him, it means that the meat will be cheaper. Because it means in the amount of time that he was shechting, he had one more kosher animal. If one more animal is disqualified, it means that the meat will be more expensive. Because in the amount of time that they paid him, there's one less animal. And now they have a dead animal that they purchased that they need to get rid of because it's not kosher. So the butcher is going to want to find a shechet that has a good pass rate, because otherwise it's costing the community. And so the shechet would have an interest, even though it makes no difference to his pay, there's still a subconscious interest of where he would want more animals to be kosher. That's why he needs to be very God-fearing, because if he's God-fearing, he'll realize that that there's no personal interest, that he's just doing whatever the halacha is. So this is another example. The pausing in between, nobody will ever know about. Okay, so back to the scenario we were discussing. If you cut the majority of the windpipe or perforated the gullet even slightly, then and then paused and continued, then the animal is not kosher. Whether you continue cutting in the same place or in a different place, as we explained. Halacha number 7. It is thus explained to you that the concept of shehiyah, which is pausing, does not exist with regards to the windpipe of a chicken at all. Why? Because if he slit the minority, specifically the windpipe of a chicken, why the windpipe of a chicken? Because if he slit the majority of the windpipe, then it's already kosher. Because for a chicken, we've learned that once one of the two pipes have been cut, majority, it's kosher. And if he cut a minority, then we said that cutting a minority of the air pipe doesn't do anything. So that it's fine. But if he slits, as opposed to if he was to cut majority of the air pipe of an animal, then and wait and continue, it would disqualify, because an animal needs both pipes to be cut for it to be kosher. Or if you were to cut the gullet even slightly of a chicken and then wait and then continue, it would become not kosher, because as we've learned, the moment the gullet has a tiny hole, then the animal is considered fatally ill. Following rules apply when it's slaughtered of a chicken and waited, but does not know whether the gullet was cut or not. This is an interesting one. So he started shefting, and then he stopped, and he believes he didn't yet reach the pipes. And then he continued. So he is not sure. Maybe he already hit the pipes, maybe he didn't. So what he could do is, he could cut the windpipe alone in another place, and then once the animal completely dies, then he can open up the gullet on the inside. And if he sees there's any blood in the gullet, then he knows that it was already perforated and it's not kosher. If there's no blood there, then he knows that he didn't hit it and it's fine. So that was scenario number 1. For some reason, the Rambam now goes to disqualification number 3, which is chalada. If he inserted the knife between the animal's skin and slit both the sides in the ordinary fashion, no, I skipped one. Halacha number 9. What is meant by chalada? For example, one inserted the knife between one side and the other. He stuck the knife between the two sides. Whether he then slit the upper side above or the lower side below, this is unacceptable. This is called chalada, which is digging. If he inserted the knife beneath the animal's skin, so he kind of just like an operation, he slipped it just beneath the skin, and then went ahead and shechted the animal in the ordinary way. Or if he didn't even put the knife beneath the skin, he just put it beneath the wool. It was a sheep that had a lot of wool, so he just slipped the knife beneath the wool, and then he went and he shechted the animal. Or if he even just put a cloth over the knife and he shechted the animal under the cloth, as long as it's not openly revealed, it's a question whether the animal is kosher. Okay. Similarly, if he slaughtered less than half the size with chalada and completed the slaughter without chalada, again, there's a question whether it's kosher or not. Therefore, practically, it is considered like a non-kosher animal. I see there's a question over here that surely causing the animal unnecessary suffering is the primary objective of Shechita. Otherwise, it's not kosher. That's a good question. My thoughts are that I don't know if I could say it's the primary objective of Shechita to make sure the animal doesn't suffer. I would say that's a condition of Shechita. Meaning, as Jews, we don't want to cause the animal to suffer. But that's not the objective of Shechita. The objective of Shechita is to bring the animal to an added level of holiness. There's a famous story in the Gemara. One Purim, the great sage Rabbah invited Reb Zera for a Purim feast. And they got shikar, they got intoxicated. And Rabbah got up and he shechted Reb Zera. Anyhow, the next morning he sees what happens. He davens to Hashem and he brings Reb Zera back to life. The next year, Rabbah asked Reb Zera, you want to come over for a Purim feast? Reb Zera said, not always does a miracle happen. A rather shocking story of the Gemara. Rabbah was a great sage. I mean, to think that he literally got up and shechted Reb Zera sounds as shocking as it gets. The Rebbe explains that Shechita doesn't mean to kill. Literally, Shechita means to elevate. What happened in that incident when Rabbah shechted Reb Zera was he revealed, when one drinks wine, secrets come out. He revealed such great secrets of the Torah that he elevated Reb Zera to a point that Reb Zera couldn't handle it and he died. The next year, Rabbah thought maybe now Reb Zera has reached a higher level and he will be able to handle these great secrets. And Reb Zera said, I'm not ready for it. What this illustrates is that Shechita doesn't mean to kill, Shechita means to elevate. So the primary objective of Shechita is to elevate the animal. Along the way, we want to ensure not to inflict any pain. That's why we have a full, 14 chapters in Shechita, because we need to make sure this is a process of the Torah of elevating the animal, and we need to make sure that it's done in the correct way. So we do want to avoid the animal feeling pain, but that's not the primary objective. That's a side condition. Okay. Now we go to drasa. So the Rambam goes back to number 2. Okay. I'm going to continue. But a great discussion. So what does drasa mean? For example, one struck the neck with a knife as one strikes with a sword, cutting the signs at one time. So boom, he knocked them without passing the knife back and forth. Or one placed the knife on the neck and pressed it down, cutting downwards like one cuts a radish or a squash until he cuts the sides. It's unacceptable. He cannot apply any pressure to the knife. He needs to hold the knife and just move up and down until the knife cuts through. But pushing down makes the animal not kosher. What is meant by hagrama, slipping? This refers to one who slaughters at a high point of the wood pipe where it is not fit to slaughter. You see, there are 2 nodes, they look like 2 kernels of wheat at the top of the wood pipe. I saw pictures, but I didn't manage to load them at the large ring. The following rules apply. If one slaughtered in the midst of these kernels, if he left even the slightest portion of them intact above the place of the slaughter, it's acceptable. Or he slaughtered from the slanting cap of the wood pipe or lower. This is within the place that is fit for regular shechting. If, however, he did not leave any portion of them intact, but instead cut above them, this is considered as being slaughtered with hagrama and is unacceptable. So hagrama is where he cuts the neck too high. Not sure why I have it over here slipping, but that's what it means. If one split the majority of one side of a chicken or the majority of both sides of an animal and then completed the slaughter through drasa or hagrama, then by pushing or doing it too high, it is acceptable, for the minimum measure of shechting was done in the proper manner. If at first you slit a third of the wood pipe through hagrama, which is in an invalid way, and then cut 2/3 in a valid way, it's acceptable, because remember we said that if one cuts the minority of the wood pipe, it does not make the animal not kosher. If you cut a third in the appropriate manner, then cut a third through hagrama, and then went back and cut the third correctly, also kosher, because it was only an insignificant part that was done in a forbidden way. If at first you split a third through hagrama, but then cut a third appropriately and then a third through hagrama, it's unacceptable, because at this point the majority of the pipe was cut in a forbidden way. If one cut a portion of an animal's throat with drissa or chalada, it is unacceptable whether it was the first or second third. So when it comes to drissa or chalada, then if he cuts not the wood pipe but the throat, even a slight amount, then that makes it unacceptable. Now we're up to principle number 5, ikr. What is meant by ikr? That the gallet and the wood pipe were displaced and slid from their place before the conclusion of the shechting. So basically they became dislocated. If, however, one split an entire side or its majority in a chicken, and then the second side became dislocated, the second pipe became dislocated, then the shechting is kosher. If one of the sides was displaced and afterwards one slit the other, the slaughter is unacceptable. If one of the sides of a chicken and then discovered that the other one had been displaced, but he's not sure at what point did the other side become displaced, then we are unsure whether it is or isn't kosher, and therefore we treat it as not kosher. If the sign that was cut for shechting is discovered to have been displaced, the actual sign he cut, afterwards he realizes that that pipe had been dislocated. So it's acceptable. For certainly, had it been displaced while he was shechting, he would have felt it. The fact that he didn't feel that it was displaced while he was shechting means that it must have been displaced after he shechted. Okay, number 17. When does the above apply? When the shechet did not hold the signs in his hand while he slit them. But if he held the signs in his hand and then shechted them, which is not the regular way, then it could be that they were dislocated already beforehand and he didn't feel a reduction in the tension with the knife because his hands were holding it right there. And therefore, such an animal would be considered an avela. Whenever we've said that the animal is unacceptable, the animal is considered an avela, not kosher, and if a person eats it, he would have to he would receive lashes for eating not kosher. But only an acceptable shechet or shchita, as commanded by Moshe, our teacher, prevents the animal from being considered a non-kosher. So by default, the animal is non-kosher unless you know a proper shchita took place. Whenever you have an unresolved doubt whether the shchita is acceptable, there's an unresolved doubt whether the animal is an avela. Therefore, he would not receive biblical lashes, but only rabbinic. So what's the difference? Let's clarify this again. So if we've said it's unacceptable, then it means that it's still considered non-kosher. But if we're not sure whether it was or wasn't acceptable, then the person who eats that meat, we're not sure whether he did it or not violate the law, and so he would only receive rabbinic lashes. Okay, when the thigh of an animal and the meat of its hollow were removed, and thus it appears lacking when it crouches, this is an avela. It is as if half of it was cut away and was divided into two bodies, thus the shchita is ineffective. Similarly, if the animal's backbone was broken together with the majority of the meat, its back was ripped open like a fish, the majority of the windpipe had been severed, or the gullet was perforated in a placement for shchita, it's considered non-kosher, while alive, and shchita will be ineffective. The same goes for animals, chickens, in all these matters. Now, back to the gullet. So now he gets into great detail, and I see it's 1:30. So I encourage you to read the rest of the Rambam when you have time. This is a great description of the gullet, which pictures would definitely benefit. There are pictures available. I don't know if Google will help, but the little Rambam I have in front of me, it actually has diagrams. When the majority of the cavity of the windpipe has been severed in a place fit for shechting, the animal is an avela. This also applies if it has a hole the size of an isser. Okay. Lots of small holes. Basically, we're now discussing all different types of injuries that exist around relating to where the animal is shechted and whether it's considered non-kosher before he shechts it. If the windpipe was perforated on both sides, okay, here's an interesting one. If it was perforated and he's not sure whether it received the hole before or after the shechita, then he can perforate another place once the animal is dead and then compare the two holes. And if they're similar to each other, then he knows that both perforations happened after shechita and it's kosher. But if they look very different, then he knows that the first hole happened before the shechita and the animal is not kosher. But when comparing, you need to make sure that the two places that you're comparing are the same. So we compare only a hole in a large ring together with another hole in a large ring, or small ring with another small ring, because the gallet is made up of these rings. You actually see them if you see a picture or a diagram. For the entire windpipe is made up of a series of rings. Between each large ring is a small soft ring. Thank you for joining us as we learn Hashem's wisdom and unite with thousands and tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of Jews across the world in the daily study of Rambam and become knowledgeable in every section of the Torah. Wishing you a wonderful day. Any questions?
Rabbi, where can one get hold of that little booklet?
That's a good question. Unfortunately, in South Africa, it's a lot more difficult. So I'm not sure. I could maybe send pictures. If you WhatsApp me, I can send you some pictures. Happily.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions?
Shabbat shalom. Mevorach.
Shabbat shalom.